Sego Sewagwego Skawanati Ujets. My name is Skawanati, and I am the partnership coordinator of the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. And I'm also Ganyange Haga of the Turtle Clan from Kahnawake, which is, for those of you who don't already know, the closest Indian reserve right across the bridge. And so it's my duty and honor to welcome you to Jojage. Wat Gwanawaradu is how we say that. And, you know, just to remind you and acknowledge that this territory of Montreal was once in the care of the Ganyange Haga, and we're still here. We're still doing it. That's it. Thank you. Nyawa.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Skawanati. So I'm Jason Lewis. I teach here at Concordia in the Design and Computation Arts department. And I'm also the University Research Chair in Computational Media and the Indigenous Future Imaginary. And I direct the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, which is the research partnership that is organizing the event today. And the Initiative for Indigenous Futures is a SHIRT partnership. We have partners from across Canada, universities, community organizations, urban Aboriginal organizations, arts organizations, all of whom are interested in this question of how Indigenous people are imagining our futures, and then helping build capacity to actually concretely imagine what those futures might be like, whether it's with building artwork or creating video games, or writing academic papers, or doing community development work, all sorts of different ways that we're invested in trying to help make sure that when we think about the future, Indigenous people are there. And then also from within the communities, so that we can help in the conversations, the many conversations we're having about what we need to do today, about where we want to go tomorrow. So one of the components of the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, which we also call IF, so if you hear me saying if, I'm not asking a question, it's the acronym. One of the things that we do is this Indigenous Digital Media Archive project, which we have really started getting off the ground the last couple years. The grant itself started in 2015. And then a couple years ago, we started getting sort of serious about it and started trying to figure out what we meant by the Indigenous Digital Media Archive, using some seed exhibitions to kind of get started in thinking about how we might go about doing this work, and realizing that we were really very much interested in starting the wider conversation with people outside of our group here at Concordia, with our partners in the partnership, but also with a wider audience like today, about what that might mean to create an Indigenous digital media archive. So why particularly Indigenous digital media? What we found, so lots of us are artists or who work with digital media, or curators who deal with digital media, or people who are generally interested in digital media. And one of the things that we found when we first started thinking about this, really about 10 years ago or so, was that that not a lot of Indigenous digital media was being properly archived. This is true for lots of digital media, right? This is sort of in one way, this is a subset of a larger issue about what do we do to preserve all this digital material that we're creating, and developing new techniques and processes to go about doing that. But it's also partially about sort of Indigenous arts and the way that for a very long time, Indigenous arts has not been sort of covered and talked about and written about in the way that sort of mainstream art is. And so the fact that they were Indigenous artists, also meant that their work was kind of getting lost and not necessarily being preserved. So when you sort of kind of put those two Venn diagrams together, then you end up in sort of a precarious place. And so we know that there's been some really important work done by Indigenous artists in digital media since the 90s at least, if not a couple before then. And that it's important not just for our community, but we think for the wider arts community to preserve that history and sort of understand those genealogies of practice. And the other thing that makes it a little bit challenging too is that unlike sort of in the kind of mainstream art world, there are very few Indigenous artists who are digital media artists, who really that's their main sort of mode of making art. There's a lot of Indigenous artists who have done digital media pieces from time to time, but there's very few that that's really the kind of their main focus. And so sometimes it's hard to see the Indigenous digital media art because you can't be like, oh, there's all those Indigenous digital media artists. I'm going to go and look at their work and make sure that preserve that work. You had to look at some artists who have a very long and wide career where they only have maybe 1 or 2 digital media pieces in there. And so that's another challenge that we face. So we wanted to address that. We are holding this symposium today as a way, like I said, to kind of start the conversation with a wider audience, people who have expertise in any of these areas that are willing and interested in engaging in a conversation with us. I myself am not an archivist or an art historian, so a lot of this is new to me as well. So this is a way for me to learn. So I'm very excited to be here today and very excited with our lineup of speakers. I hope that we can have a really good dialogue. We're gonna have the speakers talk one after the other, and then do about an hour or so Q&A afterwards, so we can hopefully get into a conversation about what they brought to us. So I think, is there anything else I need to say, Sarah, Mikkel? No, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, but Condor? Okay. So I'm going to say the thank yous. And so first of all, our major funder for IF is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. We also want to say thank you to Martha Langford and the Jarislowsky Institute for Research in Canadian Art, which has helped fund this and helped fund a roundtable that we had earlier. David Howes and the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Society and Culture, also here at Concordia. Bart Simon and the Milieux Institute for Art, Culture, and Technology, and that's actually where we are right now. That's the location of our research studio. So I want to thank you to all those people. And I also want to say thank you to our team of fantastic, amazing research assistants who continually make us look really good. So I'm very grateful for that. Done a lot of work to put this thing on today. And in particular, Sarah England and Mikkel Prue, who are the coordinators of this conference. So thank you very much. I want to do a yes. Okay, so just quickly, like I said, we're going to have 3 speakers, and we'll introduce each of them in turn. Each speaker will talk for about 40 minutes. We'll take a break after the first 2 speakers, right? Is that how we've scheduled it? And then we'll have the 3rd speaker, and then, like I said, we'll open it up to the question and answer period. Okay, anybody have any questions? No? Awesome, let's go.
Sego again. Sego. It's a Mohawk joke. Okay. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sherry Farrell Racette. I will read her bio. She's an interdisciplinary scholar with an active arts and curatorial practice and is a leading historian of Indigenous art in Canada. Her work is grounded in story. Stories of people, stories objects tell, painting stories, telling stories, and finding stories. Farrell Racette began her academic career in Saskatchewan Indigenous education, working at SUNTEP, all caps, the Gabrielle Dumont Institute. Sorry, that's what it means? Okay. And First Nations University of Canada. She remains committed to Indigenous ways of knowing. Farrell Racette has done extensive work in archives and museum collections with an emphasis on retrieving women's voices and recovering aesthetic knowledge. She has illustrated 8 children's books. I didn't know that until I read your, collaborating with noted authors Maria Campbell, Ruby Slipperjack, Frida Ahanaku, and Wilfred Burton. Primarily a painter and textile artist, she also creates narrative objects and has begun to incorporate soundscapes into her work. Beadwork is increasingly important as an artistic practice, creative research, and pedagogy. She is currently teaching in the departments of visual arts. In the departments of visual arts? University of Regina, and I had to add she's a killer Scrabble player. Oh my God. Take it over, Sherry.
This is actually forcing me to revisit a project that I started in 2011 and kind of abandon it when I moved back to Saskatchewan, because I ended up responding as one does to requests from the communities that took me more deeply into museums practice. But I have this whole pile of stuff that I gathered, and I've also been thinking a lot, and because I'm back in an art history department, so I was teaching here for a while. I was here for 3 years in the art history department. Then I moved for, I don't even know how long, I can't remember, a while, to the University of Manitoba, where I was cross-appointed between Native Studies and Women's and Gender Studies. And now I'm back in a Department of Art History at the Faculty of Media, Art and Performance in Regina. One of the things that I've come to, I suppose, make peace with is that I'm either in a context where I have many Indigenous students, but not very many artists, or I have a lot of artists and not very many Indigenous students. So I'm sort of surrounded by artists with a few Indigenous students, but I found it frustrating to work in Indigenous art history in a context where I didn't have students with the same kind of interests. So I bounced back and forth. So one of the questions that I sort of launched my Indigenous art history project with was, can you have history without an archive? I am an absolute archive geek. I mean, I am somebody who literally for a good time will just scroll through census records if I'm bored, or if whatever's on TV, watch curling and scroll through the 1850 census records for fun. So I have this brain full of trivia that's a little weird. But one of the things that I've been working on recently is also the idea of, so can you have history without an archive? No, not really. There's different kinds of archives. There are living archives, and then there are documentary archives. But as a historian, you go to the archive, whether that's an elder, whether that's a census record, or whether that's a bunch of old photographs. But also, can you have Indigenous scholarship and creative research without the capacity for future media formats? So that we're looking, right now what I'm working on is shifting our PhD program to a creative research model. And so that's part of what I was working on when I went to Regina. So a lot of our graduate students are working on different kinds of formats. And sitting around in the round table, it's like, I'm a consumer of digital media. I'm a consumer of digital and online databases. I rely on them. But I don't know very much about them, because when these guys started talking all that stuff, I was just like, I have no idea what they're talking about. But I know that it's important to use them. So why are archives important? Michael Lynch has described the archive as more than a source of documentary information, but also as sites of historic struggle over the writing, collection, consignment, destruction, and interpretation of entire histories and communities. During the roundtable, we had a really dramatic example of a vital creative community that existed largely online and then simply disappeared. That happens in conventional archives as well. Who is collected? Whose stories are important? Who gets foregrounded? Who's in the dusty bins? What documents get scanned and put online, and what are at the end of the list? In the 1999 introduction to Native American art in the 20th century, W. Jackson Rushing, a non-Indigenous art historian who looks at Indigenous art histories, presented the reader with a series of questions. Which story, told by whom, to what audience, and under what circumstances? Eight years later, at a gathering of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective in Saskatoon in 2007, they posed 4 critical questions. So this is at Corralling Art in Saskatoon. Is there space for an Aboriginal discourse on Aboriginal art and curatorial practice? 2, how is the discourse controlled and who is responsible for creating space? What strategies can be employed to heighten the profile of Aboriginal voice, and what is the future for Aboriginal space in academic institutions and galleries? Today, the growing nationwide emergence of courses and programs engaging with Indigenous art history and Indigenous art practices is a form of legitimization. So since 2011, now 2019, a lot has changed. We saw at OCAD a kind of mass Indigenous hire of 5 positions. Emily Carr just put out a call for 5. One of the ironies of that is that people are looking for fully formed professionals without providing the necessary support for recruiting and developing and growing our own sort of next generation of Indigenous art historians. But they want to hire them. But if course development and teaching relies on existing histories and resources, then the concerns raised by Rushing, echoed by the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective in 2007, remain largely unanswered. Power imbalances are still being perpetuated, and part of that is because of this, that the archive is empty. Or the archive, as Skawanati pointed out this morning, and as I recall my own messy, very messy office and basement, the archive is actually in a box underneath your bed, or in a storage unit, or somewhere else. It's not accessible. We don't know what's out there. In 2011, I began an Aboriginal art history archive project with the following objectives. Pretty ambitious for a 3-year project. To critically assess and catalog existing research and critical writing on contemporary art with an emphasis on Aboriginal voice. To begin the process of analyzing Aboriginal curatorial practice through existing curatorial writing, exhibition catalogs, and other documents that trace its emergence. To facilitate the movement of knowledge between the creative productive sphere of artists, artist-run centers, and art museums into academic discourse in art history, curatorial studies, and art criticism. And to begin the process of creating a shared database and archive. To launch a number of small research projects that will pilot workable models of documenting and disseminating Aboriginal art history, and further theorizing on Aboriginal arts and curatorial practice, and to identify vulnerable digital and online art sites key to the conceptual and historical evolution of contemporary practice in Aboriginal arts. And I had a few specifically in mind that had disappeared. In one particular instance, an important Métis photographer, Murray Mackenzie, who was key in the development of NIPA, the Native Indian Inuit Photographers NIPA Association. Yep, those guys, right? So there was a federally funded museums project that encouraged museums across Canada to curate exhibitions. And so Murray Mackenzie curated an exhibition of his work. He ended up as many people, elderly, plagued with health issues, living in a small city in northern Manitoba, where towards the end of his life, he was selling his photographs at the Thompson Pharmacy to pay for his medication. So the Thompson Pharmacy has an excellent collection of Mackenzie's work. But when he passed away, there was no provision for his own personal archive, his like the negatives, the thousands of photographs that he took. And so the only thing that existed in terms of even teaching about Mackenzie's work, which was absolutely important to the emergence of Indigenous photography, was that website, which eventually disappeared because that whole network of curated sites, even though it was funded by the federal government through Canadian Heritage, didn't last. I tried all kinds of various ways to find out what was happening with the archive, to talk to family members about the importance of preserving their father and grandfather's legacy. I literally used the Moccasin Telegraph. Even the Moccasin Telegraph didn't work. I had people I knew knocking on the doors of family members in Thompson. Someone was like, oh, my brother-in-law is going to Thompson. I'll get him to do this. And oh, my auntie's going to Thunder Bay, but to no avail. And so that's currently an empty archive. And so what exists are the works that Mackenzie sold to galleries. So there's a few pieces in the Winnipeg Art Gallery, a few pieces in the University of Winnipeg archive, but it's pretty sparse. I'm interested in print media because there's a particular period that we're were lacking. So this is actually an article from the Brandon Daily Sun, July 9th, 1913. Headline, Indian boy artist catches spirit of the plains. They never mention his name. Through the whole thing, the kid's name is not mentioned. 12-year-old genius artist, do they talk about his name? No, they do not. So we have no idea who this young man might be. But it was through digital newspaper archives that I was able to scan and throw in different keyword searches to try to pull up as many references to Indigenous art that I was able to. In many, especially in Western Canada, the art news was covered in the women's section of a newspaper. So it would be like fashion, recipes, art. And so there was an important exhibition that happened in Winnipeg, 30 artists and VOW show, and then a little tiny addendum for Manitoba Indian artists will also exhibit. And I mentioned it during the roundtable that we have this tendency in history to create a history that's a sort of a litany of, and we valorize individuals. This art history is this person, and this person. I'm interested in the people that came before, that were around during, that were part of a critical mass, because you don't create movements with one individual. You create movements by mobilizing numbers of people. So Noel Watney, I remember from when I was a kid, because he's the one who took the store over from Daphne Ojig after Daphne Ojig moved to British Columbia. Ross Wood, I wasn't sure who he was, but found out that he is Linus Wood's uncle, who taught him how to paint. Hey, yeah, good connection, eh? And Joe Land, I was like, who the heck is Joe Land? And then when I was over at my mom's, I saw that there was a print that I remember buying with my dad, and I'm like, oh, right, there was this like literally little artist, about that big, and we all used to just call him Little Joe. So then I bumped into a guy from Saugeen who was teaching in my department. I said, so is Little Joe's name really Joe Land? And they're, oh, yeah, his name was Joe Land. But the entire time I grew up there, I never heard his whole name. And Lawrence Whitehead, I recognized, who went on to become the chief of Opaskwayak First Nation, where he was from. So 4 artists who are relatively unsung in the history and the emergence of Indigenous art in Manitoba are part of this. In the 3 years of the project, we were able to make some progress on these objectives. The study of contemporary Indigenous art and curation has been hampered by the relative lack of substantive documentation of exhibitions, artists, artworks, and art events. The initial presentation and dissemination of contemporary Indigenous art primarily happened in artist-run centers or collectives, or alternately in municipal or regional galleries or non-gallery venues. The first time I saw an Indigenous artist was in Eaton's in Winnipeg, where the Professional Artists Inc. Hung out and did painting demonstrations, and I was really little, and one of them was Friendly, and I watched him paint, and I thought it was cool. Because there was no room for us in the institutions, there was no room for us in the galleries, and so people did things like had exhibitions in hotels, they had exhibitions in the hallways of conferences, and because the Hudson's Bay Company was tied to the Inuit collectives, there was no space for First Nations artists there, so Eaton's became one of the sponsoring venues. While these spaces have played and continue to play a key role in maintaining the innovative and experimental edge so critical to contemporary practice, they are marginalized in the larger network of art institutions. Their funding tends to be modest and unstable, dependent on a continuous cycle of grant applications to multiple sources. This has had a major and detrimental impact on the documentary record and critical traces upon which art history, art criticism, teaching, and scholarship are founded. This is particularly problematic for the mid to late 20th century and the emergence of contemporary Indigenous arts, and for studying early works of artists whose work has become critical in the evolution of an Indigenous arts canon. In some cases, important events and exhibitions have gone virtually undocumented. The Indians of Canada Pavilion at Expo 67, until John Moses sort of identified his father's personal collection of photographs of the pavilion, was really reduced to something like 3 photographs in the National Archives. No internal photographs. Captain Vancouver for Native Perspectives, an exhibition in 1997, which responded to a Charles Comfort painting that had been taken down from a Vancouver hotel with quite a bit of controversy around representation, was acquired by an art gallery, I think the Confederation Art Gallery in Prince Edward Island, and they curated an exhibition around it and invited 4 contemporary Indigenous artists to respond to it. I saw it in Regina, and it absolutely blew me away. And so when I started teaching Indigenous art history here, I thought, oh, I want to teach about that exhibition. So I got my research assistant to see what she could find. Well, all we really had was one very scruffy little article and my memories. The gallery didn't document it. There was only one artist on his website had documented the work that he had created with the show. So it was a significant exhibition that moved that conversation about representation forward. So in 2019, what has changed? The most obvious change has been the rise of social media platforms that currently, I would suggest, provide the prime discourse of contemporary art. Every artist collective has a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and blogs. A fragile archive indeed. But I continue to be struck by knowledge gaps. A couple of weeks ago, I stood in the vault at the Mackenzie Art Gallery with a small group of students in front of several early works by Ruth Cuthand. The curator asked my students if they knew who the artist was, and they didn't know. And I said, kind of tactfully, like, what do you mean you don't know? That's Ruth Cuthand, what's the matter with you? And they were going, whoa, and then I said, she does the beaded pathogens. And they're, oh. So they were familiar with her current work that is strongly, if you Google her name, that's what you'll get, all these images of her beadwork. So the curator, they had never seen her earlier work. And the curator looked at them and said, you won't find the history of Canadian art online. You have to look in catalogs. You have to look at magazines. And that is true. However, with a few notable exceptions, Indigenous art criticism and curatorial writing is rarely found in existing art publications until fairly recently, really recently, when Canadian Art began their recent series of special issues with guest editors and guest writers creating columns, like Richard Hill and Lindsay Nixon. Seeing Red, a special issue of Black Flash, summer 2007, edited by Ryan Rice, and Making a Noise, a publication of the Banff International Curatorial Institute, stood alone as publications dedicated to our voices writing about our art. While things have inched forward, the bulk of Indigenous curatorial writing is still scattered in exhibition catalogs, individual articles in magazines, and websites that often falter and disappear. We have not been able to sustain our own publishing initiatives despite brave efforts, beginning with Tawau magazine, which, although a Department of Indian Affairs publication of uneven quality, has significant important content. Talking Stick, published by Circle Vision Arts Corporation in Saskatchewan, survived for 4 issues, and I was really excited to see your copies from your box out there. Like, seriously, and Ruby's going to scan it for me so I can put it in the archive. Kimawan, launched in Saskatoon by Joy Arcan, Mika LaFond, and Jarita Grey Eyes, produced 8 issues, but proved exhausting for the editors, who posted a photograph on Facebook of a birthday cake for Joy with the words, "Hiatus, don't hate us." So they promised to come back, but they never did. Red Rising out of Winnipeg, which takes a broader focus, but with significant creative arts content, is still in production. Tracking and collecting back issues can be a challenge. Even something as simple as was part of my project was acquiring scanned back issues of Tawau, which I hope to be able to post online so that people could just page through them, proved to be a challenge because the department that they were originally created under the auspices of doesn't exist anymore. We would need to get copyright clearance from every participant many of whom are not named or are named by a nickname because it was such a small community. Everyone was like, well, you all know what we're talking about. No, we do not know who people are. And some people are no longer active. When chasing the ephemeral paper archive, the digital invariably seems the best solution. I'm a consumer, as I said, of the digital, but I don't understand it and I can't manage it. And I'm not alone. Several artist-run centers and arts organizations have initiated art historical and art criticism projects, but most have become unsustainable. I initiated this project in large part because key online resources upon which my teaching had come to depend were either unavailable or stagnant. For example, in 2005, Urban Shaman launched 2 related web-based projects, Conundrum, an e-zine dedicated to Aboriginal art and culture in the digital land, and a web-based new media gallery, Storm Spirits. Launched by digital arts pioneer Ahasu Muskegon-Esqueo and director Steve Loft, the project was tied to Muskegon-Esqueo's curatorial residency and funding for the Marvin Francis Gallery, a small project gallery at Urban Shaman, which is an artist-run center in Winnipeg. Due to Muskegon-Esqueo's passing in 2006, Loft's departure in 2007, and shrinking funding, this important initiative stalled. Similarly, an ambitious program of online exhibitions and artist-curator interviews on the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective's website became impossible to sustain. This concern is not restricted to new media and online historical and critical projects, but permeates all aspects of the study of contemporary Indigenous art. Small galleries and centers often lack the funding to produce exhibition catalogs, and those produced are often printed in limited quantities and quickly go out of print. More recently, they go online. Small arts organizations rarely have the personnel, time, or space to develop and maintain substantive archives, and few resources are devoted to research and archiving beyond the active curatorial schedule. For example, Sagewawak Artist Collective has 1 full-time and 1 part-time staff, and that's for everything that they do. So archiving isn't even on their horizon. As a result, important performances, gatherings, and exhibitions from which new directions and discussions emerge continue in a contemporary oral tradition which becomes the creative lineage of innovative practice inspired by ideas in circulation. While this in itself is one of the most engaging and unique aspects of contemporary Indigenous arts, it creates a significant information void between those who produce creative knowledge and those who seek to study and teach it. Much of this knowledge is housed within our collective memory. And it can also be critiqued of being a bit cliquish because it means you had to be part of the group at the Banff Art Center that time, or you had to be one of the board members of an artist collective during this particular period. So it's not intentionally cliquish, but it means it's knowledge that's contained within the lived experiences and memories of a relatively small group of people. So if you're a master's student and you want to do research in an area, often this important information is inaccessible to you. The ephemeral nature of web projects and the rapid shifts in technology and platforms render significant projects highly vulnerable. One of the earliest web-based projects whose importance, as is often the case, was not fully appreciated until years after its creation is The Language of Spiders by Ahasu. The current online version appears to have most of its components, but it's jittery. It jumps around. It's not, you can use it, but it just seems a bit jumpy. Created in 1996, updated in 2011, possibly as part of the Ghost Keeper archive initiative at Grunt Gallery, this seemingly random content map that I located on a search lacks any indication of how the creator of the map was connected to the original project or subsequent attempts to preserve it, as also does a 2016 page on UQAM's website. The Language of Spiders and storm spirits now float in the digital world, no longer tethered to their host organizations. As they age and awareness of them fades, they are not often the subject of searches, and they drift further inland into that space online where unloved and unsearched for things go. As we move towards the digital in multiple ways, we grow increasingly reliant on a relatively small group of knowledge holders, people with the expertise and technical skills to negotiating these shifting paths. Most post-secondary institutions simply cannot keep up. IT expertise tends to be centralized, leaving entire departments without consistent support. At my previous institution, we put up a fierce resistance to a move motivated by the very real budget cuts that the university was facing to centralize all IT personnel, and we were going to lose our tech guy. A man we all knew, who had become familiar with our individual and department needs and projects, and who could explain it all with patience and wit, although I did see him leaving on more than one occasion, shaking his head at our incompetence. Most faculty members and administrative assistants lack minimal competence in this area. At my current position, while new media and creative technology programs and research clusters usually have a concentration of equipment and expertise, expanding our department's web presence apparently is impossible. So I'm like, couldn't we put up our grad student projects? Couldn't we have this? Nope, I got a deer in headlights and just, no, we can't afford it. Obsolescence is a very real problem, whether it is hardware, software, platforms, or programs. God help me, I have a whole whack of research photographs from one European trip that's on Picasa. And the only way, yeah, and because I'm so disorganized, when they send out, this is, it's going away, I didn't do anything, so now I can only access those images through this ancient Acer laptop that is still functioning, and just because it's such a crappy computer, I can only download just a few at a time, so I do it every once in a while. One need only walk into a computer lab in most Canadian universities to say that we are attempting to gain and maintain digital access with the computer equivalent of a res car. New developments in scholarship will further tax the archive. Current trends away from the written thesis towards creative research and production in graduate studies will present further challenges. And this is the work of one of our recent graduates, not an Indigenous student, but a guy I was really wanting to work with, but he got accepted into a PhD program somewhere else. I'm currently chairing a committee on the assessment of non-dissertation creative research PhD projects, and one of the most important conversations that we've had has been with the library. I can hardly get my head around the projects that our graduate students are doing. Currently, for any of you who graduated back in the day, nobody has to run around getting 10 hard cover copies to give to various people anymore. Theses and dissertations are just uploaded as PDF files, and every university seems to have a different platform to do that with. For creative research options, students' work must be documented with a critical and self-reflexive lens in formats that meet 3 criteria. Number 1, it has to be reviewable and accessible. Number 2, it has to be in a format that can be appealed and reassessed should students not agree with the assessment given to them by their first external end committee. And number 3, it has to be disseminated. You have to be able to disseminate it. In order for us to move in this direction, a rich project archive will be invaluable as both students and faculty imagine and envision new possibilities in our new program. As we determine options, most of them in digital formats, it has implications for the infrastructure that must host increasingly complex materials. After internal conversations, our library affirmed that they had the capacity to handle this and were in fact enthusiastic at exploring new possibilities and new formats. But the one concern that they mentioned was the implication for person hours. Our university, like many, received a substantial cut 3 years ago, and we've been held at 0% for the last 2 years. As we move forward, we must be cognizant of the pressures we may inadvertently be placing on the people whose work lives will be impacted by the changes that we make. But if universities are challenged, Indigenous arts organizations, artist-run centers, and communities are even more disadvantaged. One of the riskiest practices is, I suppose, one we take for granted, and that is when people employed or volunteering for arts organizations use their own computers to do that work. Yeah, nod, eh? Because that's what people do. It's like, are you going to use the ancient PC that the organization has had for the last 10 years? Or are you going to use your own, Mac? Well, you're going to use your own Mac. And so we've actually, when our partner with Contemporary Aboriginal Art Archive was Urban Shaman, and there were a number of things that we could not find on the gallery's systems. They were on someone's personal computer, or they were on a laptop that somehow went to computer heaven. People were using their personal computers, but they weren't backing it up into any collectively held archive. Other risks, and this also happened at Urban Shaman, are administrative shifts where incoming administrators don't see the value of projects. They may not be fully appreciated until it's too late. Network or software changes done without considering the importance of archiving what's available online at that moment can be catastrophic. Even though we did everything we could to track down and archive everything that we had, there are wonderful video footage of Edgar Heap of Birds giving a walking artist conversation around his install work at Urban Shaman, and it's just gone to art heaven, which is really too bad because he doesn't come to Canada very often. Just this week, a curator told me that when senior management hired external consultants to install new programs in their system, they lost their entire catalog. It was retrieved, but it was incredibly time-consuming and expensive. Gallery and artist-run center websites generally don't archive exhibition and projects beyond a couple of years. The archive becomes thinner the further back you go. An archive requires a certain degree of stability and longevity. A 10-year-old paper document is an infant in a standard archive. A 10-year-old project in digital format online is a doddering elder or a ghost in art heaven. Even Grant Gallery in Vancouver, one of the most conscientious artist-run centers in terms of awareness of the importance of the archives, has gaps in their older archives. Of the 3 projects in one curator's archive, his year of important activity was 1999, only a few files are intact, with no file being the most common search result. And this is sort of open the file of Cheryl LaRondell's 2009 Nigama Askiotsi, Songs from the Land, and you can see how many of those no-file signs are there. So at one point, this had 3, 6, 9, 12 links, but now there's only a couple. I was actually going to count of the total number of files holders, the space holders, how many were no file, and in some cases it was like 3 out of 12 functioning files. In other cases, an entire file was coming up no file. And while that may refer to an actual archival hard copy, but it's not evident. There's no suggestion that this exists in another form in a hard copy. Digital archives projects and digital renewal projects are often initiated with a wave of new money, as has a couple of Grunt's project, most notably the Ghost Keeper project that they did to commemorate Ahasu Muskegonasqueyo's important work that he did, not exclusively at Grunt, but a lot of it happened at Grunt. So you get this wave of new money, and sometimes there's a wave of new money around revitalization of online sites. But even when significant funding and energy has been put into major digital archive projects, there is often little long-term funding for maintenance, and the vulnerability of links dependent on ongoing access to files on other sites renders much of the important work outdated within a few years. This is one of my favorite projects, and when I taught at Concordia, it was loaded in full at high resolution on the Urban Shaman website. So I could actually project it at the original scale in the lecture theater and just put it on play. And I had a quick sort of messenger exchange with Scott, who worked on this project, and he noted that there were 270 people who were filmed for this project, and it was a community-based project. So in this project, Urban Shaman worked with New York collective, the Water and Light Project. So we couldn't find, so when you go to Urban, what you get, this is a screenshot. It used to be that you could click this and then you could blow it up and you could have the entire projection wherever you were. You can't get that anymore. The first time I started working on this, I was trying to track down the file, the original video file. And when I contacted Scott, he said, oh, I just deleted it from his personal laptop that he was using when he was working on the project. But he sent me this link. And so now, out of the 270 faces, come on, away we go, on the New York sort of host organizations. Where are we here? This is what you have. So this is not the original video file that was projected on the building, but just a taste. And this is, I mean, it's better than nothing. Oh, I can see it? So the community work of gathering all of these moving images was done by a couple of interns at Urban Shaman. I mean, there are a lot of things that I love about this project, but I think the most important is that unlike many projects, and there are a number of representation projects done by contemporary Indigenous artists, but one could critique them by saying that the participants are selected based on their attractiveness or their sort of success, or that they're, you know, they're a role model or whatever. And these are 270 ordinary people. They're ordinary people. They're people that were at picnics in the North End. They were because some of them you can see they've got their faces painted or whatever. So these are very ordinary people, and sometimes unlovely faces with evidence of hard living, poverty, and tough luck. It was utterly unromantic and heartbreakingly beautiful, as each person looked steadily into the lens as the breeze ruffled their hair. The video has disappeared, and this is the only surviving trace of this important project, is this short video on YouTube. It was one of, and this is what happens with a lot of these projects. It's one of these projects because so much of our work is done, you know, off on the side in these small artist-run centers and regional galleries where the sort of the art critical focus is not happening. So this is one of the projects that's kind of slid under the art critical lens. But I feel really strongly that if it had a more accessible profile, that emerging scholars, emerging young scholars and curators of Indigenous art would have a great deal to say about this now. And they would have a number of other projects that they could compare it to, thinking of K.C. Adams' Perceptions project, her earlier, you know, the one where everyone wore white. Cyber, yeah, that one. And then Rosalie Favel's Facing the Camera, because it's different from those. So it's a similar kind of project, but it's different. And it, you know, it's grandmas, babies, everybody. So back. Help me. So let's consider the rise and fall of the QR code. Which is generally thought to be somewhat dated. And apparently no one ever used it anyways, but we'll see. But several artists incorporated them into their artworks, and among them are two important beadwork projects. The best known one is this project that was done by Navajo artist Will Wilson in 2011. It's a beaded version of an eye dazzler blanket. And there was another one that was done the year later by Cree Métis artist Judy Anderson. Eye dazzler was done collaboratively. And the linked videos, because I saw it installed in the art gallery and then was able to link to the videos, and you saw the creative process and the knowledge and the fact that, yes, Will Wilson was the artist, but then as soon as you accessed the video, you saw that he was very much the learner. There was a lot of Navajo chatter going on. There was a fair bit of teasing at his expense. And the collaborative hands that created this project was largely the work of Navajo women who were happily doing it. So when I saw this online, I used my phone, and that's what I got. There's nothing here. And so whatever was the original platform that was hosting the videos is no longer doing it. And so then what Will did as an original, as an artist. Oh, I'm going to do this again. Can you see it? Nope, can't see it. Is that he posted these on Vimeo. So you actually have to go to different sites to access a project that was once So it took me about half an hour of digging around to try to find the video components that went into this. So the piece without these video components is lacking significant context and content. So through the videos, you get a sense of the community that created the work, the knowledge transfer, the relationship between Will and his collaborators, and an insight into the cultural context in which the work was created. Not to mention the process. Judy Anderson's Parallel Worlds, Intersecting Moments was done in collaboration with Rochelle Vialder-Knowles and Rebecca Keynes, who are on faculty in Media, Art, and Performance, and Judy Anderson was on faculty at First Nations University of Canada, but also, I think at this time, an MFA student. So these are 24-inch square QR codes, beaded, and in an applique stitch with red stroud. And so they were really about kind of dual conversations about art and the relationship between the Indigenous art department and the visual arts department at the University of Regina, and the kind of collaboration that happened. And it was intended, because there's two of them, for people to stand side by side and sort of pull up the videos on their phones. And these ones still work. So I'll just give you a quick, but when you link to them now, they don't come up the way that they did. Oh, am I going to do this again? Here, I'm going to do this again. Sorry. Oh. So they partnered, paired people, and I'll just go to this one. So this is Lionel Piachu, who is the at the present time, the only tenured faculty member of the Indigenous Art Department, speaking Cree and talking about one of his aunts, and then there's somebody else who responds to him. It seems that this is a kind of a preservation site, because there also is, for older devices, try here if the above video does not work. And so this attempt of maintaining it. So although when you point, you don't come immediately to the same screen that other people got on their phones, you come to this selection of videos that you can play. Oh, look at her. She's learning how to do it. Hot damn. Oh, yeah, shit. Okay. So Judy still connects the viewer to still functioning video files, and perhaps it's because of the stability provided by a university server, because it took place in the University of Regina. In 2000, Jim Logan, a Métis artist and arts administrator, submitted a report with a tongue-in-cheek title, Space, the Final Frontier. And Logan's light title buffered a serious demand that visible physical space be demarcated for Indigenous art. Spatial politics continues to be a critical issue. In some cases, digital space is a marginal space that we're offered in lieu of actual gallery space, actual archival space. You know, yes, you can have a you can have a virtual exhibition, but we'll get the real stuff in the gallery. However, we also need adequate, reliable space for our growing digital needs. As we envision a digital archive, ideally collectively conceptualized, we need to consider networks and cooperative ventures to share expertise and resources. Ideally, they should be integrated with paper and object archives, but they also need to enhance and not replace our oldest archive, collective memory, story, and relationships. In this, we might look to Australia, to the AbTeC digital archive that, as of 2015, held 1,000, well, lots of photographs. 140, I don't even know how to say a number that big. My bank balance hasn't been over that for quite a while. 147,600 photographs, 5,166 documents, 491 films, 523 sound clips, and 5,196 digitized objects, almost all of them art and craft works. A total of 1,058,976 items, presented in 4 languages, 3 Indigenous and English, grounded in relationships, easily accessible, and apparently rigorously used by community. It aspires to be increasingly inclusive and accepts that its work is never done. Perhaps we can work towards a similar collective archive or network of sustainable archives that provide the essence of a functioning, growing, living archive. Story, preservation, protection, stability, longevity, and access. Miigwech.